Well, today on Spotlight Now, we focus in on our prisons and how the correction facilities and the state of mental health in our community is impacting this part of our community.
That's right. The director of the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, Tommy Johnson, is live with us today, along with a senior advisor to the governor to talk about the intersection of corrections and mental health. Spotlight Now starts now.
You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suji and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
And thanks for tuning in here to Spotlight Now on Hawaii News Now. Joining us live here now in studio is Tommy Johnson, who is the Director of Corrections and Rehabilitation here for the state of Hawaii. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Want to begin with just your overall role in this department. One significant thing to note is that there is actually a name change for this department overall. If you can speak to your role and the significance of why this change happened, that may catch some people by surprise, the significance of a name change.
Okay, well, two things. One, my role as a director is to move the department forward and to make sure we're providing humane conditions with evidence-based programs and protection to the public in our correctional facilities. The name change came about because we needed to do a paradigm shift. So last year, the legislature passed a bill that created the Department of Law Enforcement and redesignated the Department of Public Safety to the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. So all the law enforcement entities went with the Department of Law Enforcement, and now we have just the correction side and the program side of the house. So this paradigm shift allows us to change from what some may see as a punitive corrections model to one that is more evidence-based, culturally sensitive, and reach in wraparound services so we can have better outcomes and reduce recidivism for the offenders that are sentenced to our custody and care.
Tell us about what rehabilitation looks like. I know that it'll differ very widely depending on the offense and the kind of person that you're dealing with, whether they have a violent past or not. But sort of broad strokes, when we talk about rehabilitation in the corrections department, what does that actually look like?
Well, it looks like professionals providing accurate evidence-based assessment instruments to determine a person's level of risk and needs and what their treatment and educational needs are. It looks like professionals providing those evidence-based services to them. And when I say evidence-based services, I mean educational services, substance abuse treatment services, mental health services, and case management services so that we can make sure they're successful when they get out. So we do a pretty good job of assessing a person's risk and needs when they come in. We have to do a better job of what is that person's reentry needs. And so we created the Reentry Coordination Office, and we're starting to put in place now what we call reach and wraparound services. Does the person need an ID card? Do they need a replacement birth certificate, Social Security card? Would they qualify for veterans benefits to restart up when they got out? Would they qualify for TANF benefits? Would they qualify for Medicaid or Medicare? So those are the things we're looking at to help them transition out. In addition to that, we need to provide them with employable skills where they can earn a living wage, not minimum wage, but a living wage, and we need to help them find appropriate housing. That's the key here in Hawaii.
When you list off some of those things, these are things that we've heard from other department leaders within the state. Of course, the governor has mentioned it himself, including that, of course, housing piece. But when we look at just the structure of our corrections facilities and the way in which things have been handled in the past, what do you think is the most significant change that has happened within these last few years that you're hoping to move the department into a different direction?
I think it's the focus of the new administration, Governor Green's administration, in trying to really care for the people of Hawaii, and that resonates into the criminal justice system and in particularly into the correction system where we have to do a better job. Otherwise, the recidivism rates are going to stay high. People are going to come in like this revolving door. To give you an example, I started out as a youth corrections officer in 1997 here. I moved on my career. I became the administrator of the Hawaii Paroling Authority, and later on, I saw those same juveniles that were in HYCF, Hawaii Correctional Youth Facility, who had adult relatives in the system, now adults in the system. We're failing generations of our youth, and now some of those same folks are in our system, and they have children too. We have to stop that cycle of incarceration. We have to provide those services, and it will not be cheap. but in the long run, it will be less costly to the state in the way of court cases, criminal cases, in the way of services. If we provide them up front and do more jail diversion programs, we can lessen the burden to the taxpayer and have safer communities.
I think that the one thing that you're really keying in on is this idea of breaking these generational cycles and having safer communities. I think when a lot of people look at the prison population, there could be, a lack of compassion, a feeling, well, these people need to serve more time. There needs to be a tougher approach to end these cycles. What do you say to folks who are critical of this approach? Why does it work?
I would say that 95% of the people incarcerated will come back out. So you ask yourself this: Would you rather have someone who comes back out who's rehabilitated, who's had treatment and programming, who's got a higher level of education, who has job skills, who re-socialize slowly back through the system, has employment, has a place to live in the community, or would you prefer to have somebody come out who maxed out of prison after 10 years, who's done no programming whatsoever? We've afforded them no opportunity to change themselves. I firmly believe that we have a duty to change the trajectory of the lives of the people in our custody and care if they want to do so. We have that duty. And if we don't, then we're failing them and we're failing the communities, because we're letting people out of prison then who haven't had the opportunity to go through treatment, who haven't had the opportunity to get programming, and they will revert back to their basic behavior, which is to commit crime in order to survive.
I want to remind those who are tuning in here that if you want to engage in the conversation, of course, you can enter your questions for Director Johnson within the comment section of our Facebook page on Hawaii News Now, and we'll try to get through them as Yanji kind of continues to monitor those questions coming in. I do want to ask you, Director, there is always a lot of talk during this legislative session as things come up each and every session, and that is just the overall availability of space with our corrections facilities. There have been talks of just the overcrowding that's happening. What update can you give us right now on how things are going, just number-wise, when we look at those in a prison and the overcrowding issue that seemingly it always is before the legislature?
Okay, we have about a little over 3,700 individuals in our custody and care now, both male and female. A little over 2,000 of them are sentenced felons. The rest are pretrial, sentence misdemeanors, parole and probation violators. We don't have room for them here in the state, so we have to keep about a little over 800 folks on the mainland. Now, I must say, we reduced that number of folks on the mainland substantially in the last year and a half due to policies I put in place that we would not send nonviolent Class C felony offenders there. And I also would like to state that our overcrowding is not in our prisons. It's actually in our jails, like HCCC and OCCC. That's where we have a lot of pretrial folks who simply can't bail out. We have folks in our custody who have $10, $15, $20, $50 bail, but it's costing us and taxpayers between $253 and $260 a day. I firmly believe that if somebody is nonviolent or their needs can be met better in the community more effectively and efficiently, then why don't we give that person the opportunity and provide those services in the community? We then can reduce our population in our jail, reduce the rampant overcrowding, but at the same time, we can help reduce recidivism by providing those services in the community.
These kinds of programs that you're talking about, these alternatives to sending someone to jail as soon as they're arrested, who would provide something like that? Is that something where there would be a nonprofit partner that would then stand up a facility like that, like the YWCA, for instance? When people are transitioning out, there's a women's facility for people who are transitioning out of prison, something like that? Or does it look like the state actually standing up some kind of separate facility that would be that serve as that transition?
I don't think it would be a single separate facility. I think it would take the different stakeholders, the Department of Health, the Judiciary, police, prosecutors, the Public Defender's Office, the Department of Human Services, and the Department of Correction and Rehabilitation to sit down and look at diversion strategies and then look at the best ways to do that. And that could be done with multiple nonprofits who provide specific services. For example, Queens Navigator services for case management services. You can contract with, as we have a contract with Fernhurst for YWCA for extended furlough, which is an excellent program. We also contract with WIN, Women in Need, and other providers out there that provide the safe, secure beds for them. When I say secure, I don't mean secure behind a fence. I mean a safe place for the person to be at night to lay their head.
when we talk about these facilities that you mentioned and some of the overcrowding that is currently existing, as you said, in more of the jails, can you talk about just the conditions overall that those inmates are experiencing and how the state looks to upgrade some of those facilities? Because we know that many of them are aging. What is a long-term plan for not only maybe looking for new facilities, but upgrading the existing ones?
Well, the long-term plan is to update our master plan. Our master plan was last updated in 2013. It should have been updated 10 years later. So we're 2 cycles behind. The master plan gives us a roadmap of where we are, where we want to go, and how we're supposed to get there. Right now, our facilities are old and antiquated. As an example, parts of OCCC are 110 years old. We're trying to replace OCCC now, but the cost will be over $900 million. With construction escalation costs, when we provided the estimate in 2018, it was $535 million. With construction escalation costs, it's between 8 and 12% a year. Now that's kind of balanced out some, but the longer we wait, the more it's going to cost. We're looking at, so our facilities are old and antiquated. They're really not efficiently laid out. So for an example, OCCC operates at a ACO count of 435. A more modern facility can use technology and AI, and you could reduce the staffing at OCCC down to around 300 or less. If we did that, nobody would lose their job. We would take those ACOs and move them to our vacancies in the other facilities on Oahu, thus reducing the overtime cost, which is for us is about $20 million a year. We're doing major construction at Women's Prison now. We're building a new administration building. We're building a new visitation building and a new dormitory. That new dormitory will allow us to move all of the women pretrial offenders and sentenced misdemeanors from OCCC to women's, and OCCC will just be a male facility, so they could spread out. They won't be so overcrowded. Then OCCC would become a hybrid jail prison where all female intakes will take place at the women's prison. At HCCC, we're building a dormitory now for 48 new beds. That'll help, but we also have money in the budget to request for money for the feasibility of construction and design of a new Kona jail, because about 34% of the 300 plus offenders at HCCC come from Kona. If we're able to build a jail in Kona, we can keep the connectivity with their families, less wear and tear, putting vehicles on the road 5 days a week, multiple vehicles at a time, and I think it would just be a more efficient operation all the way around.
$20 million in overtime is pretty significant, and I know that every agency has staffing issues and staffing challenges right now. How is your recruitment and retention going? And absent building up a facility that has the kind of things that you're talking about, in the meantime, how do you bring that overtime cost down?
Well, we've met with UPW to work with them, to ask them to come out with us on recruitment efforts, ask them to work with us to get their members, our employees, to come to work. Right now, we have about 1,535 correctional officer positions. About a third of them are vacant. And unfortunately, we also have people out on military leave, people out on workers' comp. So what we're trying to do is increase our recruitment efforts we now started working with the military transition centers for folks getting out of the military. We're going to universities. We're doing job fairs. In fact, we have a job fair today at the Blaisdell. We have a booth set up, and we have the ability where people can download an application, and we can accept an application for an emergency hire on the spot. We're advertising on the bus, and we'll be advertising on the rail system. We hired a company to assist us with placing ads in the movie theater when you're waiting to watch for a movie. If information will come up. And we've got a lot of information on our website. What people don't realize is Hawaii has the civil service, have the best benefit package in the nation. And we need to put that out there so people can see and understand that.
You had mentioned one of the things that you'd like to do is to reduce and maybe someday not need to send prisoners to Arizona in the long run. If you can speak to how that transition will eventually happen. I mean, we've been doing it for some time now as a state, and it's become part of this department's sort of policy and just overall practice. How do you begin to change that mindset and the reliance of facilities on the mainland, such as those in Arizona, where the state currently relies on? How do we move away from that and keep all prisoners here?
Well, there's two different ways to do that. One would be for the state to build a new prison, not a jail. And I want to make the distinction between a new jail. The new OCCC would be for pretrial and sentenced misdemeanors and people coming back through the system who are going out toward work furlough. A prison is for strictly convicted felons, no misdemeanors, no pretrial, no no petty misdemeanors go to that facility. Everyone in Arizona is a convicted felon. In order for us to bring all the inmates home in Arizona, the state would have no choice but to build a new prison system. Short of that, we'd have to have drastic changes to the criminal justice system where you can do diversion for nonviolent offenders and then, and by that, do bail reform and other things. By doing that, you reduce the prison population here in the state, and we can start bringing people back from the mainland sooner. Right now, we bring them back when they hit the 36-month mark prior to their tentative parole date. Some come back sooner, some may come back a little bit later. It depends on what programs they've completed and where they are in that process. Most of the people coming back from the mainland have done all the programs except sex offender treatment and work furlough. Those are the only two programs we don't have there. No state in the country will allow you to do a work furlough program in their state to release inmates. And then we do sex offender treatment here because we do group settings. It's not effective if you're doing it through electronic means.
Let's talk a little bit about the rehabilitation services that are available to the prisoners who are here in Hawaii. What do you have and what do you need?
Well, we have a number of programs now. We do sex offender treatment. We do mental health treatment. We do educational services treatment. We have a program at Halava where we do up to an associate's degree, and we're going to work with Chaminade University where we're going to expand that to Women's and Waiawa Correctional Facility. We have a number of vocational programs and services we provide. We provide parenting, anger management, cognitive skills training. I think what's needed is we need to solidify that as part of our reentry process. It means everyone who wants to go through the process, who wants to get the ID cards, who wants to get connected to services, that's where I think that's our weak point, and that's what we have to do better on. If we're able to do that, we will have better outcomes, because what some people don't understand is that we take for granted things like an ID card or a social security card or a birth certificate. A vast majority of the offenders we have in our custody have never had those things in their hand. Have never had it. And some have, but they've lost it because of lifestyle or it was stolen. So we need to help them get the basic things they need to survive.
A big part of the rehabilitation is also the mental health piece, and we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into this with our second guest. But I wanted to get your thoughts on just the state of the mental health and its impact on the community, specifically as it goes to your department and the facilities in which you manage. As we talk about this conversation of rehabilitation, as well as hear about some of the stories that are coming out, making headlines, including this recent incident that included a young woman who had chemicals that really is going to be impacting her life. That was dosed upon her. I know you can't speak to any of the prosecution or any of the investigation that's going on there, but on the mental health aspect and the piece of this, as we see more and more of these types of things happening, how do you hope that this whole pivot in not only a department name change, but just this overall mentality will help these two departments and these two mindsets to better improve our community?
Well, I think we need to take a look at people with mental health illness and not criminalize it. So we have two types. You have people who commit crime who have mental health illness, but you have some people who have mental health illness to the degree they don't understand that they're committing crime. Those people need a higher level of care and should be in a therapeutic setting like the state hospital. The other group who have mental health issues, who are cognitive enough to know right or wrong but still commit the crime, we need to be able to do accurate assessments, get an accurate diagnosis, and provide the treatment they need. The vast majority of the people in our custody who have serious mental health issues are pretrial. And what I mean by that is they haven't been adjudicated yet. They've they committed some type of quality of life crime, urinating on the street, some other stuff. They didn't go to court. When they finally got to court, it was continued. They didn't go back to court, so the court issues a bench warrant for their arrest. So now you have somebody in custody who has mental health issues, who's off the medication, who has no support system, and now that person requires a higher level of care. I would tell you that jail is the most costly, least effective option to deal with someone with mental health issues. That's where the diversion programs come. So if you have nonviolent offenders who have mental health issues, I think they need to have services, complete wraparound services in the community as part of a diversion program, and then we can reduce the chronic overcrowding in our jails. People always say, well, Mr. Johnson, what are you going to do about the overcrowding? I think what people have to understand is that I don't control the population in our jails. The population in our jails are controlled by the court and the Hawaii Paroling Authority. They're not under my jurisdiction. So I have only about jurisdiction over 5% of the population. that I can release on supervised release. The rest, other agencies, and we've been working with the judiciary for a number of years, particularly Judge Kim on the Big Island, the chief administrative judge. He helped us a great deal during the pandemic by helping us divert offenders. We even moved quite a bit of the probationers who were in violation mode, who were in our jails at HCCC. We moved them here temporarily to relieve the overcrowding and brought them back for the court dates. So that's kind of, we do think outside the box. But again, I have limited jurisdiction in that population.
And I think, if you talk to some folks in the judiciary, they will tell you, I have nowhere else to send these folks. I can't necessarily release them back into the street. They have committed a crime. I need to incarcerate them or at least order some jail time so that there is some kind of penalty, because there is an appetite from the public for some kind of punishment. So, it seems like, do we have enough resources? We hear about, the status of the state hospital, and even though we have a new state hospital, they're at capacity as well. So do we have enough places to send these folks, if not jail?
I think we need to develop the places to send these folks in the community, to have those wraparound reentry services where we bring the services to them at those locations in the community. Not everybody rises to the level to go to the state hospital, but again, jail, incarcerating someone who has mental health issues is the least effective, most costly option, and it's not doing the person any good, because jails across the country are not set up to address serious, persistently mentally ill individuals.
As we continue to talk about just the overall system as a whole, and when you're looking at your department and going to the legislature, this is a time where a lot of directors will have to present their case before lawmakers about their priorities. What would you say are your top priorities as you approach the legislature? What would you like to see done this legislative session?
Our top three priorities would be, one, to continue with the planning and design for the new OCCC. Two is to receive the $45 million we're asking for to build a consolidated healthcare unit at Halava, which will be able then to better service the people in our custody and care with not just, it'll be 41 beds, but it's not just medical beds, it's also mental health and suicide beds as well. I'd also like the money to replace the $18 million to replace the fencing around the Halava Correctional Facility, which is the original fencing from 1985 or 87 when it opened up, to replace the fencing around the Maui Community Correctional Center, which is also old, and for the money for the planning and design for the jail in OCCC. For HCCC, to have a smaller jail in Kona, preferably near the courthouse. If we can get those things done, we can relieve overcrowding, we can increase our ability to provide appropriate levels of medical and mental health care to our population.
We always like to invite the comments in from the public, and we've got quite a few people responding on Facebook right now. And one of them is saying, the prisoners are developing mental illness from incarceration, that the experience itself can be pretty traumatic. What kind of services are there for the prisoners who are incarcerated to make sure that, given the circumstances that they're in, that doesn't exacerbate issues that they have?
Well, we do have mental health services available and nursing services available. We have social workers and psychologists in the facility. And the person is correct. Sometimes people incarcerated are traumatized by the period of incarceration itself, because there's a huge change from being free to have somebody tell you when you can go eat, when you're going to go shower, and you also have to be careful of the people you're around you in the prison, because not everybody's your friend in the prison setting. So I agree, but we do have the services available. We do have sick call every day in the correctional facilities, and people in our custody and care, whether they're pretrial or sentenced, are able to see medical.
Unfortunately, you are taking over a department that has had a history of some corruption. There has been some things that have happened within certain leadership and those who have held posts and positions within the department and working in some of these prisons that have abused their powers. As someone who is taking over the leadership of this, how do you address some of those stigmas that currently exist still in the community about just the overall transparency of the division, as well as people feeling confident in the leadership that now run these facilities?
Well, I think you go out to shows like this. If reporters ask for an interview and you have the ability to, you should interview with them, and you should tell the public the truth as much as you can. Certain things may be still in investigation, and we can only mention some things, but I think we should be as open and transparent as possible. We should always hold our employees accountable, and we should also hold ourselves accountable as well. But there's a lot of misinformation out there, so we have to do a better job of getting the good information out there. I'll give you an example. Someone walks away from work furloughed, that makes the news, and that's fine. But there's 1,000 things that go right every day in the correctional facilities. We have to do a better job of getting that information out there so they can see it's a balance. We can't control human behavior. If an inmate decides to walk away from work furlough, they've earned their way there, they met all the criteria. The vast majority of the time, it's because of relationship issues, to be perfectly frank. So maybe we need to do a better job of the resocialization aspect, to do a cognitive refresher, remind them, hey, you worked a long time to get here. Don't mess this up, only deviating from a past to go see your girlfriend.
The kind of change that you're talking about that we started out, the name change itself from Department of Public Safety to Corrections and Rehabilitation, that kind of a shift, I'd imagine that it's going to take some time. What are the metrics that you use to measure success? How do you know that things are working and that you are making the steps toward that rehabilitation kind of system that you're hoping for?
Well, first I ordered all of our programs to do a review to make sure that that the programs we're providing are evidence-based and it's updated. I'll give you an example. Our Cash Box program, where we have a therapeutic substance abuse treatment program, level 3, which is the highest level, the curriculum is 25 years old. So I ordered the curriculum to be reviewed because now you're talking 2.5 generations ago. So the values of the offender may have changed and their experience have changed. So we need to make sure that the curriculum is updated to deal with those things. So I think it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be quick. But I think doing things like that to try to look and make sure that we're providing evidence-based programs and that we make the systemic changes we need, I think that's the best way to show that we're serious about changing. And we're going to have hiccups, but we need to learn from those hiccups and we need to move on. We have to keep moving forward. Just because it's hard doesn't mean we should stop.
A big part of this job that I think many people don't realize is your relationship that you have to have with lawmakers and those who lead the public safety committees within the House and with the Senate, and many of the directors who fall under Governor Green's administration have had to become political and have to have these conversations with legislators and lawmakers. What can you tell us about the conversations that you've had thus far with those who are leading some of these areas at the Hawaii State Capitol? Do you sense that there is a support for your department when there seems to be a long laundry list of things that the state needs, and oftentimes you are trying to really get your share? How would you assess your relationship with lawmakers and just your overall ability to help get what your department needs?
Well, I think we're pretty successful with the budget process so far. We asked for $89 million for various issues, mostly construction improvement projects for the facilities. We ended up we asked for $96 million. We ended up with $95.5 million in the governor's budget. So when I talk to the legislators, I tell them, when we're asking for money, if you go back historically and look, the department has been underfunded for decades. That's why the facilities are in the disarray they're in now. So we need to catch up with our maintenance programs. We need to catch up on the preventive maintenance. Right now we're playing whack-a-mole, meaning we ask for $20 million, we get 10. So we get 10, but we got a $20 million problem. So now we can't do a valid maintenance program because we have to now worry about, if this breaks down, it's $500,000, if this breaks down, it's another $1 million here. So I would ask the legislators and the public to understand, we're running prisons and jails. They run 24/7, 365 days a year. Not an office building that closes after 12 hours. It is very hard on the sewer and water and the electrical infrastructure when you run 24/7. But at the same time, I understand we're competing with schools, the need for new infrastructure, new roads. And let's face it, corrections is not sexy. We don't generate revenue. We suck revenue. But if we can do that more efficiently and by improving the services we provide to the inmates, we can reduce the overall cost to the criminal justice system, to the taxpayer, and to the state.
We're almost out of time, so I want to ask you for a final thought. But before we get there, we do have a comment here from Damon, a question here. And I know you were talking about recruitment efforts, and he's asking, do you think this career is worth the base pay or only with overtime? What makes this a good job to have? Because as you said, it's not something that is necessarily sexy. Right. It's not something that gets a lot of good headlines.
Mm-hmm. I think if you want to actually help people and you want to be part of the change you want to see, this is the career for you. I agree that the corrections officers don't make enough money. I have provided 3 different proposals, if you will, to the director of DHERD, which is 1, raise the minimum pay for the corrections officers, meaning they need a pay raise. 2, return step movements to the corrections officers that were given up back in the late 1990s. And 3, look at hiring bonuses and longevity pay. Hiring bonuses mean the person would get half the bonus within 30 days of reporting to training after they finish the academy, the other half after they finish their probationary period. Then you look at longevity. If you have 10, 15, 20, 25 years in corrections, then we should offer you, providing you come to work at least 80% of the time, because that's one of the concern issues we have, then you should be eligible for some type of bonus at those marks, 10, 15, 20, 25-year mark. And if you, by tying that to someone's attendance at work and then no discipline within the last 2 years, you're actually cutting down on the overtime and the person's coming to work.
Well, we're out of time, as we said, but before we let you go, just a final thought. What do you wish the public understood about your department and something to leave us with today?
Okay, I would hope the public understand this is a hard job. And we try to tell our employees, don't take the job home at the end of the day. But think about this. The true heroes are the corrections officers and medical staff and the cooks and cook helpers that show up every day knowing they may end up staying for 16 or 24 hours, knowing the next day is their birthday or their wife's, their anniversary or child's birthday, but they still come to work. So I would say understand that corrections is a hard job, but it's a necessary job, and we're here 24/7, and that please understand sometimes when you see things where a person walks away from a work furlough program, we're doing everything we can to get them back. But understand, for that one thing that went wrong, there's 1,000 things that go right every day.
Okay, Tommy Johnson, thank you so much for being with us today. We'll be right back with Dr. Michael Champion to talk about mental health and the prison system. You're watching Spotlight Now. Stay with us.
Well, welcome back to Spotlight Now, and we continue on in our conversation about corrections and mental health and the role that they both play in as we look at to this problem that is impacting our community. We want to thank all of you for submitting your question for Director Johnson, and we want to continue to encourage you to engage in the conversation. You can, of course, enter your comments into the comment section of our Facebook page at Hawaii News Now, or you can scan this QR code at the bottom of your screen. And we'll be tracking them for our next guest as well.
That's right. And joining us live in the studio now is Dr. Michael Champion. He is the Mental Health and Justice System Senior Advisor for the Office of the Governor. Tell us a little bit, then, first of all, welcome. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you. Good to be here.
For those of us who are not familiar, and this is a new role for the administration to have someone serving in this capacity, tell us a little bit about what your task is.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I had the privilege of working in the Department of Health here in Hawaii for about 10 years with a very dedicated team who are working on solutions upstream and downstream from folks who end up in the justice system and corrections. First is the forensic chief and medical director for the Adult Mental Health Division. And clearly there is a need to address the reality that it's more likely than not that somebody with serious mental illness in this day and age is going to be involved with the justice system at some point in their lifetime. We need good evidence-based solutions that are going to turn the curve on that. And so when Governor Green came in office, and his priority included caring for the people of Hawaii, particularly those for people with behavioral health conditions, and knew that this was a pressing issue that needed to be addressed, he created a position as senior advisor to him and the governor's team on mental health and justice, and where mental health and justice intersects.
It is a pretty specific role when you look at just as you described it there. But if you can maybe dive into what your role exactly does within state government. Are you working specifically with various department heads and leaders, various parts in the community leaders? What would you say are some of your main responsibilities in this role?
Yes. So in order to get and develop and implement effective solutions in this space, by their very nature, that needs to be a collaborative approach, coordinated planning, coordinated policy development, and coordinated implementation involving government and also the private sector. And so my role primarily is to focus on policy development and working with other leaders and stakeholders and operators and implementers to bring solutions to the table to address this issue of mental health and criminal justice.
We heard Director Johnson just a moment ago talk about how incarceration is the most expensive and least effective treatment for the folks who are struggling with mental illness. Yet it seems that a lot of people end up in the criminal justice system. Are there enough diversion programs? My guess is not at the moment. And if not, what would you like to see happen? What could happen in the short term to try to address some of this?
Yes. Clearly what we're doing is not working here in Hawaii, but this is all over the country. And so when people are in crisis in the community due to a behavioral health condition, it's very likely that they will encounter a law enforcement official who then becomes a first responder. And then the issue is, what do you do at that point? What are the opportunities to do something different? So as I mentioned before, without good solutions in the community, a person with serious mental illness is 10 times more likely to go to jail than they would to a hospital to address the things that they're struggling with. And Director Johnson mentioned that that is the most costly, less effective, or least effective solution that we could have to address these particular challenges. And so the solutions are going to involve upstream improving the crisis space and programs that are available to people who are in crisis, and then also build the opportunities for people to off-ramp from those points of crisis into care and support in the community as an off-ramp off the justice system pathway. So what we see is there's a continuum, and this helps us understand the challenge, but also build solutions. And it goes from being in crisis in the community to interaction with law enforcement, to being involved with the court system, and then further downstream to jail, or maybe even being sent to the Hawaii State Hospital. The reality is right now that at Hawaii State Hospital, as you discussed in the previous segment, 100% of the individuals sent there at this time are from the criminal justice system on criminal court orders, and we need to shift that paradigm.
When we talk about just even with that paradigm shift and transitioning into this type of care and response, there is also concern about just the availability of those mental health professionals in the field that are able to help with this need. And so while you're able to make this transition, does the state have enough personnel and people and experts in this field to help with what could be a wave of people needing help?
Yes, we're certainly seeing an ongoing need for people with mental health and behavioral health conditions to receive help all along the continuum. We need more, clearly, but we also need a shifted way that we approach things for people who are having behavioral health conditions. So it's really a two-pronged approach. One is building the programs that are going to be available to off-ramp people from this pathway, but the other is behavioral health professionals who are going to support them. In addition to that, having housing solutions that people can be stabilized in once they get off that pathway and are not ending up in jail or at the state hospital.
It feels like we are just sort of at the beginning of this process. How long does it take to actually create a kind of system that you're talking about? What's the runway, if you will, to get to where we need to be?
So it takes a while, and what we've seen in other states is the most important thing first is to develop aligned priorities and aligned commitment to start moving into change. And once you do that, it is incremental change over time, but you can see a big impact for standing up a program like a crisis center that's an alternative to an emergency department, that allows people to be bought in by law enforcement and linked with treatment in the community instead of going downstream into a jail or a prison or ultimately to the state hospital. And you can have a big impact pretty quickly on a community by building that resource and solution. And we're planning to develop one in urban Honolulu for that very purpose. So you can have impacts very, very soon in the short end, but in order to make the impact at every step along the way, including in the judiciary, including the state hospital, et cetera, it takes time. I mean, we're talking on the level of years to do that. But from my perspective, one of our fundamental challenges is we've been taking a criminal justice approach to a public health problem. And once we align around changing that paradigm, then we're going to see change fairly quickly.
We know that paradigm that needs to shift is not only on the implementation and the logistics and the structure and framework of government and the way things flow, but also with just the overall public perception and a paradigm shift that people have to have. Oftentimes, there are many who come from a school of thought that will see some of these crimes that are committed, and some of them very egregious and very hurtful to families who want to see that individual be punished and paid for. And sometimes when the mental health aspect is brought up, some will say that they're getting a pass on this, that they should be punished. How do you change that public perception to help educate people about how to care for these people when they've done something that many will consider very serious?
Yes. One important principle is it's not one size fits all. I worked for about 15 years in jails and prisons in my career on the front lines or working in facilities and systems. And there are a whole variety of people that you will find that are in correctional systems and end up in correctional systems. So what we're focusing on today is a discussion on those individuals who have minor charges or less serious charges, who have behavioral health conditions that end up in that setting and they don't have an effective way to address that. Certainly public safety is paramount, and that needs to be the focus of everyone. across the continuum from the public, working in healthcare systems, working in correctional systems, working in judicial systems. But it's very important that you have the right people in the right place to have the most effective outcome. So going back to Governor Green's priorities and creating a position like this and prioritizing bringing a public health solution to this particular problem, what's really, really important is that if you go back 20 years ago, we didn't really understand the problem as we're discussing it today. We also didn't really understand what the evidence-based solutions are, and we certainly weren't building them out to see change. So in my work over the years, it's really, really important to educate the public about what this problem is, which I really think is the substance of today's conversation with Director Johnson and myself. This is what the problem is. 78% of people who are in our jails right now are pretrial before they've gone down adjudication. 75% of those individuals are also felony C and below, petty misdemeanors, misdemeanors, etc. And so if we develop solutions that are going to address that population, get them into care and services that are going to support them in the community and improve their well-being, improve the community environment, but also improve public safety, that's a much more effective way to address that. So I appreciate the opportunity to be able to come on today, because part of addressing your question is educating the public about that.
And we have a question from the public now. Kanoi saying, some inpatient, outpatient rehabs do not accept dual diagnosed inmates, which leaves the inmate with little resources before they are released. What can be done about this situation? Much of our conversation to this point has really focused on kind of diverting people from going in the first place. But once folks are part of that system, what are we doing on the other side to make sure that as they come out, I mean, the director said 95% of the folks who are in prison will come out. What are we doing for them?
That's an excellent question. And Director Johnson mentioned the need to enhance the behavioral health treatments and programs that are available while somebody is in jail or in prison. And that includes addressing the mental health needs and the substance use needs of people who are in that environment. We typically call that a dual diagnosis, somebody who has co-occurring conditions, a substance use condition, and a mental health condition. So we need to build out that capacity while people are under the roof of a correctional facility, but we also need to do a better job in their reentry at plugging them into similar treatment in the community when they come out to continue it. And upstream, as the caller mentioned, we also need to build capacity for those treatment programs, outpatient and residential, for co-occurring disorders.
One of the things that you mentioned that you're working on is policy overall, and with this being a legislative session, is there any sort of policy implementation or bills or things that you would like to see happen within the legislature or during this legislative session that might help your efforts overall as you roll out sort of these new ideas and initiatives?
Yes, so let me say that there are really two things that we need to develop and focus on to change the paradigm. The first is developing behavioral health crisis centers that serve as a point of deflection before somebody gets arrested, to get stabilized and to be delivered to a point of care in the community. The second thing is a post-arrest diversion program in the courts that allows somebody, instead of going down the typical pathway, to get a full mental health evaluation and to have a treatment plan that's developed that allows them to go into the community with peer supports, housing connected to benefits, mental health treatment, substance use treatment, etc. There is a pilot program now in Oahu in the First Circuit that's modeled on the Miami-Dade post-booking jail diversion program that does exactly that. So those two things, a crisis center and post-booking jail diversion, funding and supports to ramp those services up and expand beyond Oahu statewide. There are several bills that are currently in the session active right now that are focusing on this crisis care continuum and developing our capacity to deliver those crisis services to stabilize folks. So keep your eyes on those, and supporting those are absolutely key.
One of the things you mentioned, was this facility in Honolulu that you're working on. What can you tell us about that? Where would that be, and what would that look like ideally in your mind?
Yes. Mentioned the Crisis Center and Post-Booking Jail Diversion. What we found over the last couple of decades is that some national models have arisen. One of them is a behavioral health crisis center, and this was really developed and implemented and honed in Arizona, and they've had some very good successes with that. And so a model like that involves having a alternative to the emergency department where first responders or law enforcement professionals can bring somebody who's in crisis. There's no wrong door. Somebody's brought in and evaluated for their behavioral health conditions or other conditions that may be causing them to have a crisis. Treatment is provided there, and an assessment about their needs when they re-enter the community, and integrated with or linked up and integrated with service providers in the community and peer supports for when they've stabilized and lead back into the community. A behavioral health crisis center like that needs to be right-sized and right-fitted for the community that it's placed in. And as we said, there's national alignment about developing centers like this. There's active planning to have a behavioral health crisis center in urban Honolulu in the Iwilei area to do exactly that.
In some of the responses you've noted and referenced some mainland successes and
Yes.
models that you're referencing to. But when you look at your title, Senior Advisor for Mental Health and the Justice System, it is, as we said, it's pretty specific. I'm not sure that there is any other position like this in the country, but maybe if you can speak to that as someone who is maybe the first, of course, in the state of Hawaii, but maybe one of the few, or if not the first in the nation. How are you molding this position, and how are you finding those reference points throughout the country to help guide you in this effort?
Yes. So this challenge and the solution building is not new. These lessons have been learned over the last couple of decades. What I can say is new-ish over the last few years is there have been alignment around what the problems are, alignment around the best practices, and then what we're left with is coordinated implementation wherever you're doing it. And there was a recent task force of all the Chief Justices in the United States that looked at this very issue of mental health and criminal justice, that made a number of recommendations. Our Chief Justice Rechtenwald was involved in that process. He's aware of them. And when Governor Green came into office, it's clear that they're aligned around these priorities and developing the solutions. So what I do think is unique is Governor Green is a physician. He's the nation's only physician governor who has prioritized healthcare, homelessness, affordability, and these challenges of mental health and justice involvement intersect and interweave with those three priorities. And so one very important principle is if you have very complex problems that are well defined, they're really simple to solve. And that's where we're at right now, is we know what the problems are. We know what the best practices are. Now we need to implement in a coordinated way. And here in Hawaii, this is what we do best, is working together, public-private, to implement these solutions. And we have Governor Green leading, and he's asked me to kind of head up the charge with him and others in our administration to do that coordinated implementation.
It sounds like everything is kind of moving forward, but that implementation, of course, is not cheap. The kind of initiatives that you're talking about require a lot of investment. As you're making your pitch to lawmakers this session and kind of going out in the community and telling them what you're working on, why is this a worthy investment?
We have examples from other areas in the country, like Miami-Dade County, that has stood up a post-booking jail diversion program and a crisis stabilization program now for the past 25 years that we can learn from. And what we've learned from is some money invested on the front end is needed, but what you then find when less and less people are going into emergency departments, they're not going into lockup, they're not going in front of judges in the courtroom, they're not going into the jails, and importantly, they're not going to Hawaii State Hospital, that cost savings start accelerating. And so what you find is that you have some money to start it, you get the cost savings, reinvest, and it just accelerates from there.
Well, unfortunately, we are all out of time here, but we want to thank you for making time to join us in this conversation. Any last final thoughts that you may have for those who are learning more about this and your efforts?
Yes. The most important thing to do is understand the complex problem, and we do, and we're aligned around that. There's national alignment, and there's alignment here in the state with our governor, our chief justice, the mayors, in the legislature. It's going to take a three-branch solution and a community solution to turn the curve on this. And that's the point that we're at. And I would just like to reemphasize and revisit that it's at the point of coordinated implementation where Hawaii does it best. And we have an opportunity to really make this the first state that has been successful in having a statewide solution.
Dr. Michael Champion, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for watching. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders and taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Great to hear from both of our guests today as we really focus in on the prison system and the tie-in with mental health. We heard from our first guest in Director Johnson about some of the issues that they continue to have with overcrowding and some of the changes that he's making, really just to the overall philosophy of the department and how it intersects with what Dr. Champion is doing as well.
Yeah, and I thought what was really striking about what Dr. Champion was saying was that we have been taking a criminal justice approach to a public health crisis. And so, you know, learning how to address this from a mental health and from a medical perspective, kind of diverting the flow of prisoners that we're seeing and really that overcrowding that Tommy Johnson was talking about at the jail level. If we could get some of those folks out of there and into the treatment that we need, we might have, you know, better outcomes overall, not only for those individuals, but also really for our community as a whole.
Yeah, great to just really get more in depth and figure out all those things that are happening, because when you sort of hear what they are working on, this really is the beginning of really that paradigm shift that they're trying to work on. A lot of work ahead of them, through this legislative session, which they will continue to ask lawmakers for support. As Director Johnson said, it's not always the sexiest thing, if you will, we're talking about corrections and prisons, but something that is much needed in our community. Coming up on our next Spotlight Now, we're going to be catching up with Governor Josh Green.
Always a lot to talk about. Session is in full swing. What are his legislative priorities? How's the green fee going? We have always lots of to talk about, and your questions as well. So make sure you join us next Tuesday right here at 1 o'clock on K5.
Again, you can always continue to stay connected with us on social media by entering your questions into the Facebook page, and of course tuning in here every Tuesday at 1. We'll see you next week. We leave you now with this beautiful shot of Hilo Bay. Not often you see Hilo that clear, but beautiful shot there today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week Tuesday on Spotlight Now.
Aloha.